Right. Well, how y'all doing this morning? My name's Schottelkotte. I'm here to give you a presentation on wood rot repair and stuff like that. Just a little quick background. I was born and raised in Cincinnati, Ohio. My wife and I have been living in Newport for the past almost 9 years now, and we plan to stick around. And I graduated from UC, and soon after realized that an English degree wasn't going to pay my bills. So in order to supplement my rock and roll aspirations, I had to do stuff to pay my bills, and as a result fell in love with carpentry and historic preservation. I spent a number of years in New Orleans, Galveston, Texas, and out in the Mountain West, honing my craft and learning and building on that knowledge. And since I got the chance to move back here and get married, put my roots back down, I'm applying that knowledge and learning as I go. Still plan to keep doing that till I can't walk anymore. Or cut wood. I think I could still cut wood in a wheelchair. Anyway, they chose me to talk to you guys about a fun subject I guess everybody's, real excited about. The fact that you're here to look at rotten wood tells me that either you've got some serious issues with your house, or else you're looking to try and figure out how to prevent this from happening. So if we can get a chorus going, we're going to just start with a few pictures to put everybody in a nice downtrodden mood before we lift you up to redemption. Get a chorus of stuff like that. Comes in all various forms, from the top down. It can infiltrate into a house, especially wood frame and woodwork, in all directions. You get a bad roof, or else stuff sitting on concrete, stuff settles, gravity takes effect, things can start looking pretty ugly. All different shapes and sizes. It can happen up in your gutters, especially box gutters are notorious for causing a lot of damage on houses. Not just on the frame of the gutters, but it starts to seep into the framework and the sheathing of the house, and it can get pretty awful if it's not tended to and fixed. Stuff like that starts looking pretty bad. You guys can just kind of cruise through some of these. You're either happy that this isn't your house and maybe you don't have it that bad, there's still hope, or maybe you feel good knowing that you're not alone, because there's houses that look like this all over, but doesn't mean that they have to stay that way. And you guys wouldn't be in here if you expected to just sell your house and get out and go buy a brick condo somewhere, right? So, going through, everything looks pretty ugly, pretty awful, but can all be fixed. So we're going to get up here to a little bit right about here, and I'll pause on the photos for a minute. We'll just kind of, get back into what we're talking about, some of the underlying causes of the wood rot, especially some of the stuff that you see. This house right here that you're looking at with all the yellow and stuff, this is a big old house in Walton, Kentucky, just right down the road from here. And this was a pretty large-scale exterior renovation we performed on the property in concert with some of the best roofing and box gutter guys out in the area. And it was a big teamwork. It was a pretty involved project. Most of the rot on this house occurred because of the one big one. This is the main human-caused issue, is neglect. If you don't maintain these old houses, all that does is give space for the paint to fail, and then that creates gaps between the woodwork, say in between siding and trim, or behind gutters, or underneath the gutters. And once that stuff gets started, it's hard to stop if you don't, staunch the bleeding. A lot of these houses in this area have had a lot of handyman work done on them, but that's not exactly something that's going to cure the problem. Band-Aids only cover up a wound, they don't treat it. So without treating the wound, you're kind of just leaving yourself open to the damage to keep reoccurring. So the main thing is, you got to sort of find out what the cause of your rot is. Is there a leak in your gutter, or is it your roof? Because that stuff all works its way down, and it can attach it, start working its way into the sides of things. Natural wear and tear will work. It'll do a lot of damage over the course of 20, 30 years. If you haven't painted the house recently, it's going to get pretty bad pretty quickly, and each year it's just going to keep compounding on itself. Sure, everybody's familiar with, you know, raccoons, squirrels, birds. They love that stuff. Raccoons and squirrels will chew through just about anything if they think they can nest inside the place and have a little bit of shelter. Carpenter bees can cause some damage as well, but nowhere near as much as termites. Now, termites aren't as much of an issue up here as they are, say, down in the south, the Gulf South especially, but you have them, and they will eat the building out from the inside out. You won't even know that you've got damage until the thing's about ready to collapse. We've got a little phrase that we like to say on some of these projects that we can come across, is basically the only thing holding the things together is paint and prayers, and it's true, you know, especially with the termite damage, because that's when it gets pretty ferocious and you really have to do some serious, you know, fixing. But once you're able to source where it's coming from, oh yeah, and from below. See all those little spots where the columns used to be along here? It's all sitting water, and the bases of the columns were compromised, and then the weight of the entire porch roof basically just kept collapsing down onto those bases. Some of these columns lost 4 inches of their bottom on them just from the water damage that kept getting compounded on itself from the weight above it. It's not unfixable though. So what you find what you got to, you know, where the problems are, then it's time to start figuring out what the solution to it is. And there's ways to go about it. I like to call it triage, and it's basically a discovery process that I perform on these projects. And yes, it's a little bit of time without any necessary work being done, but you're not going to know what kind of work you have to do on the project until you find out what's going on and what's wrong with it. So I prepare my customers for this, and it basically gets worked into the scope of the project. So there's going to be some supporting that has to be done for structural support and for safety, you know, be it these kind of posts. We also run scaffolding ladders. You know, it can get pretty involved. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes you could stand on the ground and say, I see your problem right there. You got a big giant hole that I just saw a bird fly out of. And, you know, you can basically pinpoint something. But on a larger scale, you've got to start taking stuff off. You have to remove siding or trim. You have to take a look and see if it's made its way from that superficial layer, the decorative layer, back behind for the structural and the sheathing. And if there's more stuff that needs to be removed, to take a look and see. Sometimes, you know, you luck out, and maybe it's just that your paint's going bad. And you get a good painter in there, you do some good prep work and paint removal, of course complying by, you know, guidelines for lead paint, because most of these old houses, you can pretty much guarantee there's lead paint on them. And there's proper ways to go about treating that without causing damage to the soil or the groundwater and different stuff like that, and removal of the debris as well. So sometimes, you know, on this house, I'd say about 60% of the exterior basically just needed to be cleaned up and painted properly. And once that's done, it's going to be good for another 10 to 20 years, depending on how well they maintain it. Other times, that discovery process is going to sit there and allow you to tell a customer, or even just to tell yourself if you're working on the house on your own. You get to find out, it's like, okay, this water damage made its way past this siding. Now it's back in on the sheathing. So you find out where you can do partial patch-ins and little different locations. You don't have to necessarily tear everything off down to the studs and put it all up brand new. Not necessary. You know, in New Orleans, basically, as far as their historic preservation standards, if there's something that's 65% salvageable, they want that staying there. And so then what you do is you patch in. You may have to replicate things like moldings and stuff like that so it looks proper with what's going on. But you don't have to take it all down. You're never going to, you know, have much luck going to a big box store finding this kind of material on the shelf at a Home Depot. It's not going to happen. So basically, you want to hold on to what you can. That can provide a template for you to do the repairs and get it looking back like it used to. You know, sometimes it is a full tear out and rebuild. And the way you have to go about doing that is basically take a lot of pictures, you take a lot of copious notes and measurements. And so that you've got your basic diagram of how this has to be put back together. You know, it's down to minute details of like what's the thickness of this layer of this trim and stuff like that. Because if you're going to put it back looking like it did and you have to match what's there, you want to have all of that information done and documented before you even start taking stuff apart. So it could be a bit of a process getting all that work done with the discovery before you even start, you know, tearing stuff off and putting it back together. But it's well worth it, especially if you've got a hankering to restore the house to its original glory, or at least put it back together to make it look the way it did back in the, you know, whatever year it was built. The housing stock here has such a great range, and they built these houses so well that most of them have wonderful sticks, and the brick homes especially. There's a lot there to keep and a lot that's worth saving, so, you know, that's good. After you get done with the repair work, then what you do is you make sure that you get it closed up well. You need to properly prime and putty and caulk and paint. And I always explain to people as well, and this is something that it's just standard operating procedure for me, is I encapsulate all my materials. And what that means basically is that all sides of every piece that I'm putting on this house, as far as siding and trim, all gets primed. Even if it's pre-primed material, like say they've got pre-primed cedar siding, as soon as you make a cut for your length and you've got raw wood, that raw wood, before it's installed, gets spot primed on those cut ends. What that does for you, it provides you a protective layer on all sides of this material. And so even if there is somewhere where water can get in, it's being protected. And it's going to add, I'm not going to give you a number on the years, but it will add more than 10 years to the material that you're installing. And you don't want to just put it up raw and then have someone come in and do a quick paint job on it. You want to have it protected, and then once it's in, you finish your protection. You know, I encapsulate, encapsulate, encapsulate. When I'm working, we've got the paint right there with us. And even if it's not me, as soon as that cut's done, someone's putting that primer on that cut end, even before we put it back together. The only time I don't encapsulate is if I have to glue materials together. I'll let that wood glue hit raw wood to raw wood, and then encapsulate that. So, you know, it's just protecting your investment, folks. This stuff can cost thousands, tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of dollars. And if you're not putting the proper protections in place and do your proper maintenance, it's going to all be for naught. I have a friend who did a house over in Clifton, up in Cincinnati, and they did about $25,000 worth of work on the front porch. And it looked great for exactly 6 years. And now it looks like it did back before the thing was even done, because the homeowner said, "Oh, it looks great, thanks," and never fixed the roof over it and never repainted the thing. It never got past being primed even. So now my friend gets the call back, and it's like, nothing held up. I mean, everything looks awful again. And you know, they had to explain to the customer, it's like, well, you didn't take care of your stuff. I mean, look at it. He's like, you're right, you know. He admitted it, which was good, but if you just get prepared and you take your proper precautions, then the maintenance of this stuff is something that an individual homeowner can handle. You don't have to do everything at a large scale all the time. You can do stuff in incremental pieces so that it's manageable for your budget and it's manageable for your time schedule. And it's just an ongoing, you know, labor of love rather than an insurmountable task. So another thing that you want to think about when you're doing this stuff, and I touched on it a minute ago, the materials that you're using for the repair work. Now, your basic framing, sheathing, that stuff's pretty run-of-the-mill. You can get that stuff at the lumber yards, you can get that at the big box stores, and that's great. Now, when you're starting to work with your trim work and everything, you know, it's always good to take a look and see what material that they used in the initial construction of it. Like, say, that nice beam wrap on there, they used a lot of poplar. So, you know, go back with like materials. I like to use poplar and some other of the more durable hardwoods. I also like to use cedar, and I like to use cypress, because both of those woods are very weather resistant and also very bug resistant. So they're going to hold up for a lot longer than your run-of-the-mill yellow pine that you're going to find on a shelf at a store, or even at a better, you know, a better respected lumber yard. You know, you don't want to use a bunch of yellow pine that's only 20 years old, it's not going to hold up. It just won't stand up to the elements. Sometimes even when it's painted, it's just going to warp because the grains of the wood aren't dense enough to hold the shape. So one thing you do is you invest in a quality wood that's going to hold up and be worth the cost of the installation. So, poplar, cedar, cypress. Nowadays they have a bunch of different composite materials that are also available. I'm sure a number of you are familiar with them, but the hardy board, which is a cement fiberboard composite. They have AZEC, which is like a PVC composite, literally plastic that you glue with plumber's glue when you have joints and everything. It's very durable, it's very lightweight. I like working with it better than the hardy board because it weighs a fraction of what the hardy board stuff weighs. When you're up on a scaffold or ladders 25, 30 feet up, the weight of the material really makes a difference for somebody like me on the install. As far as the durability, they're both about the same, you know, and with paint and proper care and maintenance, they're going to last, I'm not going to say forever, but they're basically going to last you a long time. That's their whole, you know, catch, is that they're going to last. I think some of the stuff that they make these days may end up causing cancer in people, but that's personal opinion because of the dust that comes off of it. But, you know, cedar dust is pretty nasty too. But if you wear a dust mask, you get away with that. It's not that bad. Another material that they have is called boral. And there's another company out there these days called LP Smart Side. These are wood composites. You could almost imagine if there was a guy with a big giant broom sweeping up the floor of the lumber yard at the sawmill. And all of that dust and chippies and stuff like that gets pushed together with a bunch of glue and mixed around into a pulp and then shaped and formed into this other material. They'll often have a protective coating on it as well to help preserve it against deterioration and bloating. And it's good stuff, and it's pretty well designed. You know, take a look at the stuff and, you know, make a decision based on how you feel about it. The LP Smart Side looks to me a lot like some of the particle board plywood that they put up on houses these days, especially new construction. And I personally don't use it a lot. The boral, I do use a lot. I think it's more sturdy, and I love the fact that it retains its shape. It doesn't have as much expansion and contraction as natural wood. So there's a lot of good stuff that you can find. And as long as you're working with the material with it, the goal of being historically appropriate toward what you're trying to put back together, you can use these materials and, you know, make a lot of headway toward making it look like you want it to look. As I said, you know, the big box stores, just beware of the big box stores. They have inferior material on the shelves. And, you know, they take returns that people bring in and put it right back out on the shelves. And what that does, as far as if you're thinking even on simply on the budget end of your projects, if I got to go hand pick material from, say, Home Depot, which if I have to go there to get the material because that's where the homeowner wants to get it, I'm charging to be there. And I'm charging to go through one by one every single piece of material that they have. They've got lumber yards out there that will have quality conscious people picking the lumber and putting the package together for you and even delivering it. And it's more valuable to me to not have to be spending 3 hours at a big box store searching for decent, usable material when I know that this store is going to send stuff out and it's going to be usable and good, and what's not, they'll take right back and swap it out for you. So you have to think about the time involved in finding stuff as well as the quality of the material. You know, I don't mind doing it on time and materials in that sense, but it really does bother me to have to go and pick stuff out one by one by one by one. I don't do it much anymore. I've got some reliable suppliers that I can call and I tell them about my project, and I can trust that it's going to be delivered, and I can use the materials. Stay on site and do what I'd prefer to be doing is working on the project and making headway on the reconstruction and restoration. So anyway, talk. What I got coming up now is just we're going to walk through some pictures and just, you know, show you guys some a little, kind of before and after stuff, but just sort of little situational moments over the last few years that we've been doing on how to fix stuff. And some of it's total rebuild, a lot of it's not. And this is where the triage that I was talking about comes into play. And you can see how there could be solutions for projects at your own house and the way to go about doing it. So right here, this is also that house in Walton. And this roof was not very good. But upon taking the old roofing off and the old, weather paper and everything like that, for the most part, the roof was 65% good. So what we were able to do is basically just go in and reframe the areas where the damage was worse. And we did have to reframe and rebuild the entire box gutter tray. But I work in sync with box gutter guys, like this guy, as a matter of fact. He and his friend of his are my go-to guys. And, I get them in there, they do all the metal work, they set the pitch for the drainage and everything, and that allows me to continue working on the more carpentry aspect of things and, do what I do best. That's one more thing that you guys should always, when it comes to the solutions, your first solution is finding the right person for the job. I'm a contractor, and I don't do all my work myself. I'd be a fool to try and do it that way. I know that there's other people out there who are more skilled at certain things than I am. I know they can get it done faster and more economically than I could. And it would be remiss of me not to provide a customer with the best person for the job. And as a homeowner trying to do your project, whether you're doing it yourself or whether you're trying to subcontract different things, find that right person. A handyman can put Band-Aids on, and he can do good painting, but he might not be the guy who you want coming in and rebuilding the framework of a side of a house that's about to fall off. You're not going to hire a guy like me, who's a carpenter, to come in and build box gutters. And you're not going to want me to shingle your roof either, The time and expense involved wouldn't be worth any of it. So take the time, suss these people out. You want to talk to these folks that you're looking to work on your house. Especially if it's a long-term project, they're going to be there for a few weeks. You've got to see whether you can work with them and if there's going to be a good working relationship toward achieving the goal that you want. And you need to know that they're going to be able to actuate your expectations. So anyway, back to the photos. We went ahead and this is what we basically were able to do with the framing. You can see that barrel arch underneath, which was excellent. It was still in great shape. The water damage never made its way down to there. All we had to do on the underside was scrape it, burn off some of the old lead paint and everything, and then prime and paint it. And we kept that all there. So, after you go through and we put it in, you can see what we were able to leave and what we had to replace. Then after that, you put the proper weather protection down, and then you let the roofers come in and do their thing. That ended up being a copper roof. And it shines from space. It's pretty awesome. So moving along, this ugly thing is something that some of you guys might end up finding. This is a house in Newport, and that is the result of dry stacked foundation and then termite damage. And the termite damage went unnoticed and unchecked probably for the better part of 30 years. And the termites decided to go ahead and up and move. They were done. They took all the good wood out of the thing, ate their fill, and probably went to the house next door or something. But what they left behind, nobody even noticed because the plaster was still up on the walls. There were 4 layers of siding on the outside of the house, and that's what was holding the house up. As soon as they had a demo crew come into the house and things started getting pulled apart, things started getting kind of dangerously close to collapsing. So what you do when you have something like that is you basically have to get yourself a solid foundation to work with first. Make sure that it's level enough to be able to attach to and save. But afterwards, I just went through, we ran a new sill plate for the entire side of the house right there. And they were able to come along, and the guys who came in after were able to basically frame down to that plate and have a solid surface to hit onto and just build from there. A lot of work can be done that way. It doesn't have to be a full length. What you're going to find is in certain locations on your house where the water gravity was making its way down, and you might have an area this big. It might just be an inside corner It might be an outside corner. Sometimes it's a matter of just being able to post up, throw in some new material. You know, they use pressure treated lumber for anything that comes in contact with concrete or stone or ground. It's the same material that you see people building decks, exterior decks and stuff with. That's a required kind of a thing, even for general construction. Any ground contact must be a pressure treated material. And then from there, you're able to go up and just use your standard builder's grade studs. Moving back, we did a lot of work on columns on that house in Walton. And you can see what some people tried doing to help hold things together. That's a little gear zip tie thing there. It did the trick for a while, but as much as they tried to paint over it, it still looked like, you know, like a piece of metal was holding that together. By the time they put that on there, this column had pretty much already failed though. Water had been getting into the splices on every single one of the joints, and the glue had failed, and you know, it was in pretty bad shape. We were actually able to take a number of these columns apart and put them back together again, and just re-glue them and clamp them, and I reinforced at the tops and the bottoms so that they would hold in that bottom location. Basically made a giant wood plug, a little octagon that fit in for the bottom 4 inches, and up at the top we did another one, and I ran a 4x4 through the entire thing so that it wasn't pushing outward on the actual column anymore. Now it had a center post going through it, which took the majority of the weight, and so they're more structurally sound and they looked pretty good. We also built this little machine. Well, it wasn't that little, it was about 10 feet long, but with a steel shaft down the middle, and I reshaped the columns with a sled and a router just to get them looking a little bit more circular. One column I had to rebuild from scratch because it was so bad it was not able to be saved. So I used the columns that were there for my references. Like I said, you know, during the discovery, did my due diligence. You take your measurements, you take a lot of photos, and was able to basically, you know, piece together an 8-sided column and then turn it. I know they make good big giant machines, and you'll see some places where they actually can turn porch columns. I kind of had to figure out how to do it on my own and built one, and but the end result worked well enough. We were able to put it together, get it up there, and gave it the same treatment as the other ones. Went ahead and put that 4x4 post inside of it, plugged it, so everything's getting the same treatment, and they're all holding up the same way together, and just put it all together. Another thing we did with these columns was rebuild every single one of the column bases that were there. They were just so crushed and ruined that they were not usable. But I had enough there that we were able to take our notes and then build them so that they replicated exactly what used to be there. And you know, thank God for routers. They're a lot of fun for people who like to use them, and you know, that's why God invented router bits. You can pretty much find any kind of a shape if you look hard enough and, you know, search it out. And we were able to get our convex and our concave radiuses and everything on the bases. And another thing that we did was just reinforce them. Rather than having 4 pieces just clacked together and tacked onto the bottom, I made a solid disc out of each of the 3 tiers and tongue and grooved them together so that they had more gluing surface and also just solid wood all the way across. And as we put the pieces together, I also cross-grained it to add more support. But that's a tangent, I think. Anyway, so they were all able to sit on solid column bases in the first place, which gave us a lot better stability than what was there by the time we got to the project. These are the front columns, and these were fluted columns, and they weren't in as bad shape at all. Just 3 of them were pretty bad. But what I was able to do is basically just take a saw, cut the rotten bottom off, and then made a giant wood plug basically and attached it to the bottom and then shaped it. And this one actually, you know, got a giant bit and ended up doing that with it. Once it was painted, and you know, nobody could tell that the piece had been put down there, and it's solid, it's structural, and it also just has a good flow with what was already there. Another one that we worked on, one of my other high-skilled guys was able to do this, where we basically had a bunch of little wood strips that we were able to glue and stack on to reshape the dimensions of the bottom. And from there, we used an epoxy wood filler to be able to just fill and then shape to get it looking like it was with all the flutes. And so that one basically was all the way, it was still the same column from top to bottom, and we just had to add to it and, reshape the bottom, 6 inches or so. And then you can see here, we also made new bases for these columns as well with the same deal. Another thing that we did to help prevent rot was on the bottom of each and every one of these columns. You'll see them at the stores. For square columns, you'll see those square plastic or metal bases that lift the wood up off of the ground, whether it's wood or concrete. They're very valuable. What that does is that provides a layer of separation for the moisture that's on the floor from getting to the stuff that's on the column. And that's where a lot of that rot starts to get introduced. With these guys, to try and keep them with a lower profile, I used some 1/4-inch PVC sheets that I just cut into circles and attached that to the bottom of the column base so that it sat. They're not going to go anywhere. They're not attached to the concrete or anything like that. But when you have, several thousand pounds of roof and copper and everything like that, that's all they were held on for before, and we attach it to the beams above, and the gravity's going to hold that in place. But that little 1/4 inch of space is going to preserve those wood bases for 50 years, and that PVC is not going to deteriorate. So it's those little things can help. Another thing that we did to help prevent rot was on the tops of the columns, on the capitals, we had the metal guys custom shape caps that sat on each and every column and had those put in before we installed them under the beam. And what that did was prevent all those little corner areas on those tops where water can get in, where it's running down the beam and then it finds a spot to sit. Now it's hitting copper or metal or whatever you need to use, and it's got runoff and it doesn't stay there, it sheds. So little things like that are going to add to the life of this, and I don't think these folks are ever going to have a problem with the rot ever again on these columns, at least as far as, for the next couple of decades. It's hard to say, what might happen a little further. This is a little house in Miamisburg that we worked on, and we did a good deal of repair on the balustrades and the column bases. It's a little Queen Anne, they told me, I think this is 1881. And the homeowner's father had found the spindles at an antique store and made them fit the rails that were there. The rails were original to the house. And then he made all these little tops and bottoms for these. So the homeowners were pretty attached to it. They didn't want to just go in and find new spindles. They wanted to keep what was there and maybe replicate the ones that were no good anymore. So that's what we ended up doing. On the ones that were able, you could see there was a lot that bottom rail sitting on the ground, feeling pretty rough. And there was a good deal of damage at the bottom of the bases of these columns as well, especially that one. Somebody did a fix at some point in time and didn't really do a very good one. You can see how it's separating and turning and stuff like that. So, there's better ways to go about it. What I do with these column bases is I like to laminate multiple pieces of cedar together. It's a vertical grain that way, and it's solid all the way through, and it's weather resistant, and then I just shape them after that. You take a lot of rough sawn cedar, plane it down, glue it together, and then cut it to the way you want it. And what I'm able to do is just lift the porch up with the top of the column there, and then you dowel in between your base of the column and the column part itself, join them together, and they drop right back down, and they stay in pretty good shape. This is what we ended up doing on some of the spindles. You can see that I had to turn them. I had to turn about half of them, just put on the lathe and use one of the good ones as your template and just make them. Now, if you have somewhere you've got a ton of them to make, they've got guys here who have facilities where they can replicate in volume. There's a guy over in Sailor Park who turns spindles for staircases and different stuff like that for different builders. And, that's a pretty economic way to do it. If you're doing it out of a labor of love like I do, I usually don't charge except for the materials on the spindles. But I don't think my wife's gonna let me keep doing that because at some point in time I'm gonna end up having to make money off of them. Gotta pay for that lathe one way. But for me, it's fun. I like to do that and have stuff and set it up like that. And then we just took cedar and then milled down and made tops and bottoms for these. And we were able to put it back on. We made new rails because those were all trashed. And I used existing rails as the template to make the new ones. The top one, I used multiple pieces of cedar and just linked them together with we made a layout and basically a big old template. And then we used the second template to steam bend and laminate the bottom rail. So all the bottom rail, I'm not laying pieces like this, I'm laying pieces like this, which is also going to help hold the strength and everything. And then the shape of it, you can see there's a peak on it that sheds the water off. So hopefully, the water's never going to sit at the bottom of this and cause as much damage it does anymore. So we got back out there, we jacked up the whole porch and supported it, lopped off the bottom column bases, and then installed the new ones, and then installed the new rails that we had to fabricate. And then also what I got to do in this house, and this is a spot where a lot of people end up having rot issues, is they had this wonderfully ornate barge board on the gable on their front porch. And you could see the way the roofers tried to fix it at one point, and they didn't extend the shingles or the drip edge down to prevent it from getting in on that edge of that little radius piece there with the floret. We just did that one by hand. Not much in the other way to do it. As soon as you cut it to shape and you glue and attach it, and then play around with the razor knife and chisel, carve it till it looks like what it's supposed to, and then get the paint on it, and then it's missing. Well, once you got it painted, nobody would have known that it was two pieced together, especially after the homeowners came out and painted the whole thing. Ends up that it's going to be pretty good. This is a building over in Covington on Greenup Street. This box gutter and roof system on the outside of this house was awful. It had been an abandoned building for a number of decades, and water damage just kept getting worse and worse. So the new builders, did what they could to get a new roof on top of it, and then they brought us in to rebuild the box gutter cornice framing. Ended up having to do a little bit of work on the roofs as well, which is a really important thing. If you don't have a good roof on there, you don't have good gutters, you're never going to keep the water from finding a way to get into your house. Once it's all said and done, we basically had to find one spot or two that we could take measurements from, and then from that, refabricate the entire side of the house, building. And then these guys came in, did the tray and the cornice and everything. It was wonderful by the time it was finished. This is a house over in Bellevue, and what we were able to do with this one was keep the columns. They were pretty well put together. We lopped the tops off and added capitals, redid the column bases, and then we took apart the balustrades, put them back together, and more solid and everything. But you can see what I was saying before, as you post up for structural, there's a lot of weight there to hold, plus we had scaffolding on the roof for the painters and stuff that we had to worry about. Everything got removed, the deck got redone, and then we were able to come back in and finish up what we did with a couple of extra flourishes that the homeowners were able to add to what was there, appropriate to what would have been there, such as those capitals. Now those capitals are not plaster. Those are fiberglass resin capitals, and they're made by a company up in Cleveland that has a facility that still does plaster, but they also do fiberglass resin capitals, cornices, all kinds of architecturals. Everything that they do in plaster, they can also do in their fiberglass resin. So that puts a great advantage toward the durability of your product. That stuff's never going to weather the way that old plaster would. And it's got the same look, and it's the same dimensions and everything. And it's really nice extra detail. This one, we were able to basically save the rails, and just like I said, we had to take them apart, get them back together so they're all in alignment, get them all re-glued and clamped so that they're solid, and then we just were able to mortise in and put them right back in and install them right back into the columns that they came out of. We put new bases on these columns as well, using the same procedure that we used on the house in Walton.
I'm sorry, the only issue with these modern materials is that they don't feel the same to the touch, right?
What's that? Say the fiberglass resin
Yeah.
up there? No, it's not going to have that smooth plastery feel, but the look to it.
It's gonna sound different too, right?
Oh, if you knock on it with your finger, yes, yes it would. But as far as its appearance and everything like that, and they send these out with a recommendation. You've got to prime them 3 times before you even try to paint them, because what you're doing is basically sealing up any of the porousness that fiberglass might have. And to be honest, when you have a column 10 feet up in the air, I mean, do you have a special ladder you have out there so you can knock at the top? I understand where you're coming from on that, and if it was an interior application, then we'd have a recommendation that maybe you go with the plaster. That's where you can have a focus on that part. On an exterior, I think that that fiberglass resin, as opposed to plaster, is going to increase your durability, and it's actually not any more expensive than the plaster would be. So, this is a house in the Columbia Tusculum area that we had to redo balustrades on their stuff as well. Once again, now, after we conducted our triage or discovery, I was able to save 60% of the spindles and just redo some of the tops and the bottoms on them. Basically kept what was there, and we were able to use at least one of them as a template for me to be able to turn the other spindles we needed to make. And set up a little production shop, and I had the guys, you lop all that junk off, start making the new pieces and everything, and we did a really good job of getting all the old paint off so we could really see the details. And after that, it's like, these things are 70% good. If I don't have to spin a whole spindle, I'm not going to. We were able to basically dowel and glue these guys together, and we made the new bases for them. And so, you can see what the old stuff is, and this is old heart pine. You're not going to find that stuff anymore, and that's a lot different than the yellow pine that you get at the store, okay? The grains are tight together, almost like an oak or a cypress, and it's old growth. The wood that made those spindles, or that was used to make those spindles, you could guarantee that tree was at least probably 100 to 200 years old. And that's what they would have. They could, mill that stuff back in the day, and they'd send it down on the barges to the mill shop after they cut the trees down. And then the mill shops would make a bunch of these, and they'd distribute them citywide through the entire tri-state area. And that's why you could see so many houses with similar styles, because they would mass produce them out of that wood, and then the carpenters and the builders would take that material on the donkey cart and cart it over to their job site. So I like keeping this, as much of that stuff there as possible. And some of them I had to do a little bit more than others. And you can't see some of them, we had to redo some of the tops where the damage was bad. Yes, ma'am?
How did you get the paint off?
How did we get the paint off? Heat gun and patience. And scrapers. Don't use a sander. You want to get this paint stuff removed as delicately as you can to preserve the wood itself. And so you can buy a heat gun at Lowe's or a Home Depot or something. You sit there and you figure out what the good temperature is. Those things run anywhere from 600 to 1300 degrees. You don't want to go in too hot because you're going to set it on fire. You don't want to go in too cold because you're going to be taking too long to do it. There's a nice medium involved, and then it's just you've got to leave it on there enough for the paint to bubble, and then you lightly scrape it off. The more paint on there, the more layers you're going to have to scrape off. I hired subs to do it. And I just went out there and yelled at them if they weren't doing it fast enough, and then took their lunch hour away and told them they weren't going to get paid. No, I'm kidding. That's a joke. You're not going to get guys wanting to do some tedious work like that if you're not encouraging them to do it. Anyway, just patience. This is the kind of thing, if you set up at home and you've got a small work area, anybody could do this. You just have to have an eye for detail you have to have the care not to dig in too much and not expect to take too much off too fast. The more you're able to preserve, the less you have to replace.
How did you drill a hole in the nozzle on the straight?
I've got this handheld little thing. No, I don't. I do actually have like 6 or 7 of them. I collect them. But no, you just basically have to set up, I basically built a jig because, you know, some of my guys are good, some of them aren't that good. And if I'm going to be working in a production mode like this, I build jigs, which is basically something that you could actually have a drill sitting like this on a frame, and then you have another frame holding your spindle or the other little piece. You have some clamps around or anything, and then it's all lined up. You mark on your drill how deep you need to be for the dowel, and you just drill into the thing. You know, just a little ingenuity and setup time. And it takes a lot less time in the long run. You could sit there and try your best to go straight, but I've watched some of my guys, and I wouldn't trust them to drill straight for their life. And that doesn't mean that they're not good carpenters, but it's just that it's, you know, the multiple angles that you have to look from. It's just like trying to set up a sextant or something for measuring for elevations. If you don't level that thing off, it's not going to be good. You got to do it from multiple sides. So take a minute and build yourself a little jig. You know, you could do it with scrap lumber in your shop or your garage. That's my shop, is my garage. But and once that's done, you basically can hand it to your daughter or your son. Be like, here, your turn to help, and you know, let them do the drilling. And if you make it foolproof, anybody can do it. So by the time it was all finished, you know, we were able to build, once again, new rails. The bottom I made out of rough sawn cedar, and then had, we milled all the little moldings for it, and used the same cedar, just basically, you know, milled it to different shapes. The top we made out of cypress because I couldn't find any cedar thick enough. Those are both really good waterproof materials, as I've already discussed, and also because of the grains being tighter than, say, your pine, they're going to hold their shape better. If you've noticed these old houses, you'll see the top rails start to warp and bend and stuff like that. Laminating materials to build it and using tighter grain materials is going to prevent that warping from happening too soon. I can't guarantee that won't happen, 10 years from now, but I know it's going to hold its shape. And as long as it's properly maintained, it's not going to get too worked out of place. You know, that's all said and done, get that put together. I did not encapsulate these pieces yet, but every surface that you see where one piece meets the next is covered in glue. Glue is one of the best protectors, and it's also an excellent bonding agent. It'll help things hold their shape even past the expansion and contraction of multiple seasons. I'm sorry?
Just kind of start.
Got it. We're almost there. So these are these when we were finished, and then, went for the assembly. That's my helper. She's a real boss. And we were able to get it all back together. We had a nasty thing here. What I did was basically just lop that thing off. You can see the space I left for it. And what we did was just take a nice giant cedar 8x8, put it on the lathe, made a new piece to look like what was there, cut it in half, and then went for the installation. Got it put back in on there, and then once it was painted, it looked like it did back in the day. There's my other helper. My sister did that one to me. I didn't know he was on there. So anyway, that's about it, folks. Choose your contractor well, and they're going to put you on good direction. Protect your investment. Don't let things get out of hand once you put all that money and time into making it what you want it to be. And, choose your materials wisely and appropriately. Got time for any questions or anything? Okay, we have a few minutes for some questions if anyone has any. Otherwise, I have to go walk the boss. Yes, sir.
So, I'm sorry I missed the first part. I was helping someone, but the lumber, like you talking about the cypress, the cedar, is it a Spanish cedar or is it just?
Yeah, I don't get that technically involved. I like to use whatchamajiggy and stuff like that as opposed to different grains. People at good lumber yards would be able to direct you in it. I mean, I pick up my cedar from Huber Lumber in Norwood, And it's a lot of rough sawn stuff that I'll plane down at my shop because it's rough. The dimensions aren't real uniform or anything, but it's just rough sawn cedar, and it's lightweight, and it could be used for just about anything. I know that they have some stuff that they call like Pacific Northwest cypress, but it's actually a cedar. But cedar and cypress have pretty much a lot of the same kind of qualities. The cypress is a bit denser than the cedar is.
So the cypress, are you getting it at the same place as well, or?
Actually, yes, I do. There's a area around here, I think it's called the Cincinnati Wood Collaborative. They have a lot of hardwoods and more rough dimensioned lumber that you can pick up. Like Huber lumber has a lot of different larger dimension woods that you can plane down and mill and use for your own applications. And Paxton lumber over in Madeira is also a good source for more specialty woods.
Thank you. Artists has a pretty good stock of Western red cedar also.
Yes, they
A lot of
do.
different forms. So you gotta, the pricing is weird. You gotta kind of do the math to figure out in which form to buy it and get the best price. And sometimes it's backwards. But the more finished product is actually cheaper sometimes than the rough one.
Have you ever used any mahogany?
Yes. I would not really necessarily do an outside project with mahogany. A, it's expensive. B, when you're in an exterior application, it's all basically going to be painted. And so somebody would only really use mahogany on the outside of their house if it was not going to be stain grade. They would just have it there for bragging purposes. Now, if you're going to be using it in a special area, especially around, say, door entry and stuff, by all means, it's a wonderful thing to use. Otherwise, you can opt for, less expensive but equally usable materials. Anyone else? Well, thank you very much, folks. I appreciate you sticking it out for me for a little while.